Hi, I'm Susan. I'm from Worldpeacefull, and this video is really going to focus on ethics and mediation approaches that are transformative. It's taken from a paper called Bringing Shared Ethics to the Table, Creative Problem Solving and Transformative Mediation as Tools for Resolution of Controversial Conflicts. It's written by Terri Kelly, or Terri Kelly, it's a nice name. Department of Conflict Resolution, Portland State University. Now, this is really about utilising creativity in problem solving. It's about creating a focus on ethics in respect of how we resolve conflict. It's being okay without prescribing outcomes and enabling the conflict to be dealt with in a creative way, in other words, seeing differently, and facilitating a process where both parties are empowered to find their own solutions. And that's one of the great things about mediation. It's very much relational. It's very much about preserving relationships, whereas adversarial conflict styles are power type dynamics where A wishes to place power over B. It's a very traditional form of control. Around the world, we are starting to progress in ways where we're starting to understand, certainly in small pockets, that all conflict can be resolved when we have the tools and the techniques to actually do it. The traditional modes don't work, and what you'll find is that it's for those who are cost-oriented, and I tend to be, of the mindset that I get amazed that money is the primary driver, but this is the way the business world has framed itself, literally, has put money first. Now, unfortunately, what that does is it actually blinds people to other ways of resolving issues where it's not simply about ensuring some sort of control, which is considered some form of order, but it's opening one's mind to the great diversity in respect of people, and that you cannot force people to change. What you can do is you can sit down and you can work out as co-parties what the problem is, and then it's about listening and learning from the other party and the other party listening and learning from you, and finding what you have in common, what you share, and working from that point of community, you see. In the West, we've tended to have more of a individualism, a really ambitious, competitive individualism, which motivates people to win at all costs. And there are many, many litigious situations arising that end up bogging people down for years in unresolved conflict, where one seeks to win over the other rather than taking it out of that system, placing it in a space of dialogue and working out how to resolve it. This paper is an excellent one, and it is about incorporating ethics in terms of complex conflicts. In this particular case, it could be to do with, ethical issues that are sort of have been hard to resolve in the past because there's such intense feelings around those subjects. There's a lot to lose. And so people often can fall into patterns of deadlock. So I'll start reading it. It's a great paper, and hopefully you'll gain what you need to out of this. When opposing parties agree to come to the table to resolve conflicts surrounding controversial issues such as abortion issue, gun control, death penalty, harassment issues, any other sort of issue that is not typically dealt with in this type of format, the author says it's ludicrous to think that ethics can be kept out of the discussion. Though the old school of mediation dictates that mediators remain mostly diffident to such discussion, a new school is developing that welcomes ethical issues into the dialogue and seeks transformations of thinking between parties in place of or in addition to conflict resolution. This approach has been mostly applied to interpersonal disputes and has been shown to attain the transformative goals desired. Another approach to problem solving, termed simply creative problem solving, has worked well in corporate culture to discover shared values between disputing parties for the purpose of reconciliation. It is the purpose of the paper to demonstrate that key elements of these combined approaches can also resolve or reconcile parties to complex, controversial public issues. And the next paragraph is headed Creative Problem Solving. Discovering the root motivations and shared ethics of parties to such issues is a goal all conflict resolvers should aspire to. One method I found useful in the discovery process is creative problem solving, a term given to a process of conflict resolution developed by Roger L. Firestein, PhD, and advocated by the Center for Studies in Creativity at Buffalo State College in New York. It has an eye towards helping solve problems in corporate culture. Creative problem-solving adherents base the process on a few assumptions. The first assumption is that creativity is a novelty that is useful, meaning that the novel insight alone will not do, but must be accompanied by action. Secondly, that there are two kinds of creativeness: adaptive creativity and innovative creativity. Those who are adaptive use creativity to improve an existing product or service, while the innovative creator comes up with ideas for entirely new products or services. So they're inventing. And the adaptive is really looking at ways to streamline. Like, for example, if you're looking at electricity, you might have cabling. You might find that 60% of energy might well move out of that cabling because it's not insulated enough. So it's to come up with a solution, a different type of technology that creates a retention of the electricity as it passes through that wire, or there might be other ways to move that energy. So moving on from that, lastly, it says that creative flow follows the same path as in nature: divergence and then convergence of that which works, and it's got in brackets natural selection. These together form a directive that creative problem solving is for new problems and new situations, not for routines or procedures that are already working. Creative problem solving is simply a set of tools to use in situations where other problem solving methods aren't working. To begin with, and most important to the entire structure of the process, it is important to phrase problems in ways that can be solved. The phrasing or framing of the problem to be solved is the crucial element in solving the problem. I know that as a market analyst, how you frame the problem actually will determine the outcome. So if we haven't really looked at the appropriate core problem that we wish to solve, if we're coming at it from a certain perspective and we can't see another way, then we will continue down tracks in the same sort of procedures or processes that we've done in the past. So framing the problem creatively is really looking at new ways, and that's also what I was saying in my previous video about Edward de Bono. He was teaching people to break out of box thinking and become more holistic. I'd probably advocate more for the holistic thinking, where you're really taking in a lot of knowledge and cues and prompts in order to look at a situation in a different way. It can change everything. It is crucial that one asks the right question, or you might end up solving the wrong problem. It is also important to allow a solution the time to take to work. The following factors allow for a careful structuring of the problem to be solved and its solution. 1. Beware the complicated solution that is indicative of solving the wrong problem. 2. Form problem statements into questions that start with how might I, or in what ways can we, and be consistently putting the problems to the test by asking what the particular solution is sought. I often say, what if? What if this? What if that? I often look at it as in, what's the benefit of this? What good is coming out of this? Can I stand in the other's shoes? Imagine how they feel. I also believe in patience too. I think you have to wait sometimes for these creative solutions to arise. And if you're not discounting and rigid in your thinking, you will just sort of sit with things. I can remember terming it when I was working out some problems years ago in a company I was in. I saw it as throwing the juggling balls up in the air and just letting them sit. And I just waited until the penny dropped. And it always did. I always found my way. The third point is a good way to challenge assumptions is to change your perspective on the problem, which I've just described. Is what you're thinking the problem the real problem? You know, what is it that you're fearing? What is it that you're protecting? What is it that you're believing? Is it true? Is it an opportunity in disguise? What has come to challenge you? That is a different way of seeing. This is a challenge. There's something I need to look at. It keeps coming back to me. It keeps coming back. Whenever a problem returns over and over, there is something there to be learned. And rather than resisting the problem and pushing it away, and that comes through the philosophy of what you resist persists, what you look at disappears. Rather than resisting it, you actually allow. And that means your resistance doesn't attract it. Now, I'm just going to introduce here, this is not in the script here, the law of attraction. What you focus on, you bring about. What you think about, you bring about, is another way of saying that. It's all electromagnetic. We are creating the life and times we're moving through thought. So when we're mindful of what we're thinking about and in the intensity in which we're thinking about it, we are in the process of manifesting the very thing. Now, it doesn't matter whether it's right or wrong or good or bad or wanted or unwanted. What you focus on, you attract. That is, from another perspective, a universal law. This is not taught widely, but it is, in my view, a fundamental truth. So that's a creative approach. Now, fourth, sometimes the real problem is in the answer to what you think is the problem. Here's where it's crucial to ask why of every problem statement. And all the why does is just opens you up to more possibilities. This is the infinite possibility type theorizing. What if I'm wrong? What if the other's right? What if this is the best for me, not the worst for me? What if I'm not going to face ridicule? What if this is actually the opening up of more knowledge? See, the what ifs completely open up the frame. This is how the artist goes beyond the frame edges of a painting. We are breaking out of boundaries. 5, brainstorm and cluster ideas and resist stringing problem statements together into a sentence. That is really just a long string of different problem phrases. The next step in the process is to defer judgment. That one's a critical one, while generating many ideas. I've done that a lot. I'm a creative thinker myself, and when I've had to generate ideas for research, you just generate and generate, and if you've got no boundaries, barriers, you just simply allow everything to be flashed up on the board. You'll be amazed at what comes in when you stop thinking. It's actually in the not thinking that creativity arises. So to get out of traditional forms of I've got to think this through, I've got to protect myself, I've got to analyze, it's actually to relax and open up the mind to the possibilities. And if you know how to do this, you'll be amazed at what ideas come in. So the author goes on to say, assume that no solution is outlandish, so that all participants in the brainstorming process feel free to speak up. This is why speaking up is critical. New ideas come through speaking up. There is no question of, I don't want to hear that idea because that goes against what I believe is true. It's to welcome the ideas that you don't agree with. They are the doorway that opens up to possibilities. This is the infinite possibility. The minute you resist it, you know it's a door you have to open. Now that's creative thinking. In the normal process of analytics, we get a resistance to something, we fight it, we argue it, you're wrong, I'm right, and we block creativity from finding its way. Therefore, we need to welcome in that tension, welcome in that resistance. It is going to bring you far, far more value than you can even imagine by allowing it. It also forces you to come and reflect back on your own beliefs. Are they true? If you don't identify with your beliefs, they're just beliefs. So if a person's arguing against a belief you hold dear, they're not arguing against you. They're simply clashing up with the idea, and that's what we want. If we're going to break through intractable issues, solve problems across the world, you have to be prepared to be challenged. You have to be prepared to meet with the total opposite of what you believe. And I'll grant you they are your greatest teacher, for sure. That's why they're there. They're there in disguise to help you, actually. And this is the philosophy I follow in my own life. I see no enemies at all. I only see helpful teachers. And I will speak my truth in my way, or I will reflect upon it positively in order to allow for creative solutions to be found. So the author here is talking about this idea of not judging, brainstorming, speaking up. Lastly, evaluate the ideas positively by using affirmative, deliberate handling of each novelty. This process should then allow for narrowing down to the most ideal and workable solution. And that solution should be a best match for the problem. I'm going to also add here that intuitively you get this aha feeling when you know you're onto something. The next section is called Transformative Mediation. Transformative approaches to conflict resolution include transformative mediation, the conceptions of transformative peacemaking and conflict transformation. The analytical problem-solving human needs approach to conflict transformation, research on the transformation of conflicts from unmanageable to manageable, and other techniques for successfully dealing with complex conflicts, particularly dialogue and constructive confrontation. Now, this terminology is really, really important. I would say in my vernacular, it's to be frank. And my humour comes in there. No, I'm not Frank, I'm Susan. You'll have to excuse me there. It always pops in. And that's my creativity. So constructive confrontation is challenging people. Everyone goes, oh, no, don't rock the boat. Don't do it, And because we've got such authoritarian hierarchies, we're actually breaking that ability to be challenged. And we see it as you're being disrespectful, you're being rude, you're questioning my authority. No. You're being constructively challenged and confronted. Because when you are, it makes you think. You go, oh, that rubs, makes me think. And then you go, rather than attacking the very thing, you don't attack it because we're into peace and we're into well-being and health. You go, okay, I feel confronted by that. Let me sit with this. Now, if it's constructive, it means that it's non-violent. It's coming at you, but it's definitely putting a statement to you. So you might find someone who's in your meeting who's very strong-minded who puts a point, and you feel confronted by that point. Welcome it. If you're feeling confronted, there's something in it for you. So the author goes on to say, the transformative approach to mediation does not seek resolution of the immediate problem, but rather seeks the empowerment and mutual recognition of the parties involved. Empowerment means enabling the parties to define their own issues and to seek solutions on their own. The mediator role is therefore dynamic and distant, as opposed to rulemaking and direct involvement. Folger and Bush, leaders in the transformative conflict resolution movement, define recognition to mean considering the perspective, views, and experiences of the other. Recognition, they say, means the evocation in individuals of acknowledgement and empathy for the situation and the problems of others. The acknowledgement and empathy is critical. Acknowledgement means I'm heard. I have been acknowledged. You have answered me. Now, we see in a lot of government institutions and organisations, corporates, where people get ignored. And this is normal. This is regular. So someone sends an email, no answer. You know, someone's very busy, don't have time. That's one matter. But when we flick it off, it actually can become a problem in respect of people misunderstanding each other. Always with technology, it's a barrier, and until people are face-to-face with one another, they're going to misconstrue things very, very easily. So that idea of recognition is critical, and empathy means if I was you quickly expand your perception and say, what if I was that other? How would I feel if I was on the other end and I didn't get an answer? Well, I would feel frustrated. I'd feel annoyed. I'd feel like I'm not important. You know, if we were to sit there and discuss that with people, those are the sorts of terms that come out with. And this is how you see yourself in the other. How would you feel? This is expanding from self-interest. It's very, very important if we're going to create really amazing pathways and where we're going to create community as a real experience, not just a lip service. So it goes on to say recognition means enabling the parties to see and understand the other person's point of view, to understand how they define the problem and why they seek the solution that they do. There's no way you can understand someone's perspective unless they talk to you. You can't know, and you can't presume they should know what you're thinking. They don't. This is why dialogue is very important. Encouraging people to communicate is extremely important if you want industrial harmony or societal harmony or global peace. So Lezak also mentioned that putting yourself in the other's shoes is something he asks as a rule of his mediation clients. It's funny how I say meditation. Mediation is a meditation, so they're actually, it's no mistake, those two words come together. The key concepts and goals of the transformative model of conflict resolution are to recognise and give empowerment to the parties involved. See, when we take power from people, this is the powerlessness that creates ongoing conflict. All over the world, all the conflicts we're seeing playing out are all coming from a base of powerlessness. One party feels they don't have power. And the more that other controls and dominates, the more that sense of powerlessness arises, which creates a countervailing conflict. And if it's not resolved, it becomes entrenched. We can see this with, my feeling is to go to ISIL, but then again, I'd be looking at, as a problem solver, I'd be looking at what's funding that, what is the overall issues that are perhaps having an investment in conflict. What are those parties believing? What are the other parties to the dispute believing? And how do we show them where they have a shared interest? Where do we show them shared respect? See, the values are very powerful. Certainly in the Middle East, respect is very important. And honouring people, speaking to them, not speaking down to them, but speaking to them. But then we've got other issues too of people who have felt power for the first time. They've been funded, let's say, and they're getting this sense of I'm very powerful. I've got weapons, I've got more power. And there's a confidence and a bravado that comes with that. And there's a delusionary mindset around that they are invincible. And everybody then pays homage to that perceived power, which inflates it even more, and it becomes even more unrealistic. And then they take even greater risks. So there are lots of pathways to go down in order to resolve problems, and we have to become very lateral if we're going to do it. So I've just talked about the empowerment of both parties. Folger and Bush introduced 10 hallmarks that distinguish transformative mediation from other forms of intervention. Here is a summary of these 10 hallmarks. 1. In the opening statement, the transformative mediator will explain the mediator's role and the objectives of mediation as being focused on empowerment and recognition. 2. The transformative mediator will leave responsibility for the outcomes with the parties. A transformative mediator will not be judgmental about the parties' views and decisions. 4. Transformative mediators take an optimistic view of the parties' competence and motives. So rather than an undermining perspective which projects a negative story onto that other, this is the adversarial approach, we have an optimistic viewpoint. I tend to have an empathetic viewpoint to the other. I try to stand in their shoes and imagine what they're feeling, what their fears are, in order to join with them so I can be a party to the solution rather than maintaining a problem. 5. Transformative mediators allow and are responsive to parties' expression of emotions. Emotions are very important. That's why I've had that video where I expressed how I was feeling. You know, we're always suppressing, and because I'm into peace, I recognize that suppression is part of the problem. If you hold emotions down, they're going to break out in some way, and it's often in aggressive ways, hurt ways, and emotions have to come out, but we don't want them to be destructive. If a person's crying in front of you, you don't tell them to be quiet. You just sit quietly and allow them to cry. If a person's angry, you don't shut them down. You sit with them, and you can hear that they're angry. You keep eye contact so that they know that you are listening. You don't have a negative look on your face. You have a receptive look so that they can see, as they're letting their anger out, they can see they're safe, firstly, and secondly, they can see they're not judged, because they may feel humiliated if they're really angry about something and they've lost it and they feel a loss of dignity. Now, this is what sensitivity creates in people, is an honouring of that. So the 6th point here is transformative mediators allow for and explore parties' uncertainty. Now, again, uncertainty is another premise that reflects powerlessness. If I'm uncertain, we all are trying to prevent uncertainty. We pay our rent, we pay our mortgage. We might try to create things around us to feel certain. We might even control others in order to get that sense of certainty, that we're not going to be cut off at the pass, that we're not going to have something unexpected stress us. So we try to create a sort of a sanitized space around us. Now, exploring parties' uncertainty is simply bringing that up and saying, okay, well, why do you do that? You get them to talk about what they're worried about. This is what brings up uncertainty. What are the worst case scenarios? This is why it's very important for self-reflection, for people to come to terms with their own fears that may be well unconscious because they've never actually explored it. Most people don't do personal development. The mediation work here is really a combination of these things that brings up the real issues, which is always driven by emotions and values. The 7th point, transformative mediators remain focused on what is currently happening in the mediation session or setting. 8, transformative mediators are responsive to parties' statements about past events. Right, that happened, okay. And what did you learn from that past event? How did it make you feel? Do you believe that could happen again in the future? What worked in that past event that you feel confident could work in the future? Or you get them to, you might probe further with the statements, what else? What else? 9, transformative mediators realise that conflict can be a long-term process and that mediation is one intervention in a long sequence of conflict interactions. Depends on the complexity of the conflict. If it's long-term, it means there's some very deeply held feelings involved that haven't been addressed. If they keep returning, it means they're not resolved. So it could be cultural, it could be personal, it could be a fear if they let go of that conflict that something else could happen. There could be a greater fear around it. So the mediation, in a sense, can at least create a starting point, if you like, of dialogue, inner reflection, respect, safety in this space, and then allowing that creative process to be working, in a sense, underneath people. So whilst they're talking, there's actually a lot of creativity going on because the mind is a problem solver by nature. So other interactions can come in to resolve that conflict as well. If something doesn't work, look for something else. 10, transformative mediators feel, and in brackets, and express, a sense of success when empowerment and recognition occur, even in small degrees. What we don't want is people feeling disempowered and powerless, because you're going to have far more conflict, more disruption as a result of unaddressed issues at the heart of powerlessness. So we want them to feel empowered. We want them to feel they have a voice. We want them to feel that they actually have input into a process. We want to feel that they're recognised and understood and valued. This is the psychology that ensures safety and well-being. It is the psychology that creates a safe space for creative ideas to emerge. It's incredibly important. The author goes on to talk about a number of conflict theorists and practitioners advocate for the pursuit of conflict transformation as opposed to conflict resolution or conflict management. I sort of advocate, I think conflict resolution is a first step in learning how to share power, in learning how to communicate with I statements, to learn how to engage in peaceful narratives rather than accusatory, undermining, demonizing, blame shifting. The conflict management is a form of control. You're trying to control it. You'll find that in risk assessment type strategies as a conflict management, where you have various ratings of risk. Typically, it's come from physical infrastructure in that respect. You might also have in prevailing conflicts around the world where using security forces to try and manage that conflict. Perhaps they're trying to contain, a containment type strategy. This also filters into corporate work as well. So containment somehow of that problem. Engaging in dialogue is a form of starting a process of containment. It could also be done through like the UN if it's a physical conflict with arms. They might come in and just cool things down to enable a space for more rational, more enlightened thinking to take place. So the one that's my preferred option, of course, is conflict transformation. We literally change ourselves. I call it the Philosopher's Stone in my poetry. Conflict transformation. We're not only dealing and solving that conflict, but we're expanding upon it in the sense of something better is going to come from it. I personally am going to change because I have to become more self-reflective. I have to err on that side of caution and positivity more. But everyone in that conflict is going to change. That's conflict transformation. And that's actually the nature of this work here. So rhetoric does not suggest that we simply eliminate or control conflict, which is normal these days. People are trying to do that. When they say, I don't want to talk to you, go away. He rather recognises, he says to recognise and work with its dynamic nature. So you're looking at the dynamics in the conflict. What are the drivers? What's fueling it? What's coming out of it? What are we learning from it? How are we responding to it? How are we feeling about it? These are dynamics. By this, he means that social conflict is naturally created by humans who are involved in relationships. Everyone is relating on some level. The whole human condition is a relationship of sorts, one relating to the other. We are even in relationship to our surroundings, you know. Everything's a contrasting point of relating. Once conflict occurs, it transforms those events, people, and relationships that created the initial conflict. And that's always the case. Conflict transformation is also a prescriptive concept. It suggests that left alone, conflict can have destructive consequences. This is why things escalate. People become angry. People start to see an enemy. People seek revenge. People allow the hatred in themselves or the fear in themselves to motivate activities that are actually going to harm another person because they feel threatened. They need to become aware of that. However, he says, the consequences can be modified or transformed so that self-images, relationships, and social structures improve as a result of conflict instead of being harmed by it. So when you see conflict as a creative process, you will never fear someone challenging you with a confrontation, a constructive confrontation. You will utilize that dynamic in order to improve. And this is how continuous improvement can, in a sense, be harnessed through creative conflicts. Conflicts are going to be here until the end of time. You're never going to eradicate them. You can never force people to change. The more you force them, the more they're going to be in conflict. So there has to be more therapeutic and intelligent approaches that utilize that conflict as a constructive means of expanding one's own awareness and understanding. The next heading is discovering shared ethics. I believe that by combining key elements of these two processes, shared ethics will arise that can serve as a basis for resolution of complex conflicts. By shared ethics, I mean that at the root of opposite sides of a controversy, there are shared values driving the controversy. The right to life group and the right to choose group share the ethic that a person's life has value and that people deserve respect. We could even say in political areas of right wing and left wing, you know, they are sharing that idea that we have a right to say what we need to say. We're protecting interests of our constituents. You'll find there's many mirrors in the very people that you are highly opposed to. You'll find there's elements of yourself in that other. That's why you recognize it, you see. So that's why I say invite that other, because there is something to learn. This is how you transform conflict, literally. So the right to life group, they were saying here, they share an ethic that a person's life has value and that people deserve respect, of course. So though this is widely recognised concept, it is still a valuable starting point, made even more valuable to both parties when they discover the sharing of it through a transformative mediation. Proponents and opponents of the death penalty share the ethic that every human being has the right to feel safe from harm. Beginning a transformative mediation with this point and using creative problem-solving techniques in the discovery of this shared value goes a long way to bringing a resolution that satisfies all parties involved. I've sort of just had a feeling to just talk about Trump for a second, because Donald Trump is extremely controversial and there's very intense dislike of him. I personally don't dislike him at all. People go, what? How can you not dislike him? You know, the women will say he's misogynist, sexual harassment. The men will say, look at this guy, you know, he's got no idea how to diplomatically deal with his opponents. You know, he just shoots his mouth off on Twitter, they'll say. And they see him as reckless, like a sort of a wild card. They see him as generating uncertainty because they don't know what he's going to do next. And he's so confrontational and he thinks he's right. So he's not open to other perspectives. Although I'm sure behind closed doors, he's definitely moderated. He's had advisors talking to him. But he's coming from a worldview of where he's been, in a sense, a totalitarian dictator in his company. And all corporates really are dictatorial structures unless they've developed, if you like, you know, strategic business units that are devolving power and where it's shared across that organisation, you know, and also learning to delegate power. But going back to Trump, the way I see him is he's a catalyst. And so when I see him stirring up, for example, women, you know, who feel affronted by his comments and, you know, the various issues that have come out in Hollywood right now, what it's doing is it's empowering the voice of those women who were silenced before. Now, that's the dynamic that I'm observing. I don't demonize the person, the controversial figure. I look at the dynamic. The women are getting empowered. Oh, look, over in North Korea, there's real concerns around nuclear weapons. People are becoming awakened to the problem of nuclear weapons and how leaders who can order a button to be pressed have too much power. They can put at stake the lives of millions. The whole Korean peninsula, gone. Radiation flowing up to China. Chinese get concerned. So that then creates, if you like, and if we can do it productively, a conversation around nuclear weapons will start. The ICANN Nobel Peace Prize, that came from that dynamic. So from the one thing that we think is absolutely terrible that should be destroyed, great things emerge from it. This is the creative emerging from the conflict. This is why I often advocate for contrast. You're never going to produce anything wonderful unless you have an opponent. You are never going to make that difference, that absolutely brilliant difference, unless there's some form of challenge, a constructive. It could even be a very problematic challenge. But if you don't try and squash it and you utilise the contrast, great things will come about. And I'll be interested to see how things do unfold. The threat that people are experiencing in a perceived way, it's not a direct personal physical threat, but it's a psychological threat they're perceiving through totalitarian dictators who are facing each other and who have no concept for consensus, have no concept for democracy, you know, or a sense of expanded responsibility outside of their own interests. And this is why people are often talking about really sharing power, because we're all in this together. We're not, the world is changing, particularly through the internet. So I just thought I'd add that one in. So I'll go back to the article now and have a look at what this author's trying to say. So he talks about, he says, it may not mean that one side changes its values or joins the other side, but that both parties transform their thinking about the other. Okay? Hence the nuclear standoff. How do they change the thinking about the other? They don't have to change their values. or join the other side. Therefore, they come one step closer towards working out solutions that satisfies the principles of both sides. So, working out how to satisfy those principles of both sides so there's an integrity, there's a sense of dignity that comes out of this. He goes on to say, for instance, the opposite sides of the abortion issue may redirect their time and efforts away from opposing each other and instead gather together to promote better and more readily available methods of birth control. I often think of it, how can I help that other? How can I be constructive? Rather than how do I harm that other? I would never do that, you see. Proponents and opponents of the death penalty may discover that their shared need for safety is a good starting point for promoting intensive safety education curriculums in the schools. So the death penalty obviously has been used as a deterrent from killing people, which is a bit of an irony. And those who obviously are against murder want people to be safe. They both want people to be safe. That's the shared need. If none of these outcomes happen, at least there is a chance that transformative thinking occurs on some levels or with some of the people through these processes. Now imagine if we think like this all the time. There'll be no enemies. So let's go to the conclusion here. It's only short. Though these combined processes look good in theory, there is nothing to guarantee they will work all the time in action. It's because we're dealing with egos, we're dealing with agendas, and there's politicking as well behind this. If you're coming in with goodwill, it's a lot easier. But the overriding principle behind their combination is to allow for ethics to be part of the dialogue, without making ethics the only issue in the dialogue. Transformative thinking without allowing for personal ethics is not only nearly impossible to realise, but most likely detrimental to the outcome. Building a relationship upon shared values is a start towards resolving the tension controversial issues naturally instigate. And of course, in my values work, values is, like respect. My program, Real Hope Responsibility, both sides might have as a shared need the feeling of responsibility, to be responsible for what's going on, or to feel empathy. I want you to acknowledge that, what I feel. Or awareness. Oh, I didn't know that was your situation. Now I'm more aware. I've got more understanding of where you're coming from. Love comes into this as one of my typical frames of reference, is to love the other. And that means dropping all beliefs and judgments about that intrinsic value of that human being. Unconditional love is not a romantic notion. I often tell people in these videos it's coming from a very high perspective of really connecting with people. And this is not attachment, this is connection. Connecting and valuing them as you would a family member. Everyone deserves to be treated like that. Honesty is another important shared need. Tell the truth. I want the truth to be told in this situation. Both of us can make clearer decisions when we know the true facts of the matter. If we distort those facts, then distrust arises. That will entrench a conflict even more deeply if it's dishonest. That idea of oneness that I talk about in Real Hope, the oneness is we are one. At the end of the day, wouldn't we want this pie to grow so everybody benefits? And that's what happens in respect of the learnings that come out of conflict. If you are open to learning, you will expand your understanding of the world. If you're rigid and you are right, everybody's wrong, you're never going to expand. So that sense of oneness isn't going to happen for you. It's going to be always, it's us against them. And that's been a doctrine I've heard in many political arenas. It's always us against them. It's a very limited worldview. Then we've got peace. we all want peace at the end. That's the shared, we want to feel peace. We want to be in a safe space where we can communicate without being attacked. You know, we don't want to be demonized and bullied. We want to sit down and share our thoughts and ideas with respect. That's peace. And we want to feel peace at the end. It's resolved now. I can relax. It's over. Enjoyment. Once that negativity is all de-escalated and it's dissolved through shared understanding, then you can be joyful and happy and go and celebrate. Life is about celebration. Last one there is service. And I see service as sharing of one's own knowledge, sharing of one's time. You know, being in service to another person is to really be present for that person, to really hear them. So that's something to think about, something to feel about, something to reflect upon. If you're engaged in a complex conflict, this could be one of the tools that you could use. And I'll just repeat, the person who wrote this was Terri Kelly, and I did refer to her as a he at some point because I saw a quote in there from I believed it was a male academic. So I just felt to say that because she's written this article and it's really well done. You'll find that a lot of women are engaged in this mediation process because naturally we're drawn to healing relationships. We understand that the absolute fabric of society has to be intact if we're to have a society that continues. When the fabric unfurls or the threads come apart, this is the fragmenting of society where a lot of mental health issues arise. You cannot have productive global communities if the societies are all breaking down. So therefore, we need to come into a shared understanding of how to dialogue and how to mediate and how to share power in order to create the real peace on the planet. So with that, thank you very much for listening to me, and may this work be of great service to you. And as I always do, I send everybody peace, love, and in this case, transformation. Take care. Bye.